Welcome to the DWRDNET Stationery feed with your host, Derek DeWeese. This is a podcast where we talk about all things stationery, be it fountain pens, pencils, typewriters, papers, and more. So sit back and relax and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of the DWRDNET Stationery feed. Today I'm welcoming writer Michelle Geffken and the force behind the paperblogging.com website. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Okay, so getting started, let's go on and go with our level setting questions that we kind of ask everybody. There are a couple modifications because I actually met Michelle at a typewriter swap meet event. So she's not just a writer and fountain pen user, she's also in the typewriter space. I've added in a couple of typewriter centric questions, but get started. When did you get into the pen/stationery hobby to begin with?
Well, I was a bit of a stationery geek as a very young child. So my mom worked for an insurance company in England that was a very large company back in like the 70s, 80s. And when they would get rid of stationery or supplies, they would pass them on to employees. And so over the years, I ended up with quite an extraordinary array of bits and pieces, huge pads of paper and chisel pens, and I would make huge marks with those. But I ended up as a teenager with a electric typewriter that used to belong to the legal department, and we can't for the life of us remember exactly what it was, but I have a feeling it was a Hermes. It had a cubic typeface, and it had the feel of a Hermes, and we don't know where it went or anything, but I used to get up early in the morning and write stream of consciousness writing every morning, just like morning pages that Julia Cameron later championed. But my idea came from Dorothea Brand's Becoming a Writer, which was a 1930s book. So unfortunately, that kind of faded as computers came along, as many of us got sidetracked. But I also had the privilege in England at that time, kids were really taught italic handwriting, and that was a real gift. Age 4 to 8, you had to use a pencil. Age 8, you were introduced to a fountain pen, and you had to use a fountain pen. And we had a pen table in the corner of the classroom with bottles of blue Quink ink. The table was covered with pink blotting paper. And everyone had blotting paper. I was always covered in ink. That was for a sort of ADHD kid, that was a huge gift. I got to, make stuff with my hands, get messy. And we start every day with handwriting exercises. There's kind of loops, and I still do those today. I love that.
It's very neat. And that's, I think a lot of people who are new into the fountain pen hobby, they don't realize the origins of like the student pens or things like that from Pelikan or Lamy. It's because in Europe, the students would use those pens versus the US, where I never had a fountain pen in my education. I was past that time, and there's a lot of newer people who don't realize that blue ink for some, people who were in the school and used that, it's just like an instant trigger, kind of like the red ink. You think, oh, you're getting a graded paper. That blue, blue school ink is a very memorable color and experience for a lot of people. But let's talk about today. What do you currently have inked? What have you been writing with lately?
I use I use pens both for drawing and writing. I also journal daily in a Hobonichi. And so I like to have paper that will, be compatible. I use a lot of Lamy pens, just the basic, inexpensive end of Lamy's. And actually what I have inked, I don't have it right in front of me. I have a green limited edition Lamy that on the way home from the typewriter event, I stopped at a stationery store in Ithaca, New York, and I got some neon lime diamine ink, or diamine, not sure how you say it. That is super fun. I've been writing with that. It looks like spring. It's just a nice spring green with sparkles, and very fun. But I use a lot of TWSBIs, and I also I have a little Galen leather tiny pouch with a bunch of little Kavekos. So I think it's amazing. I can fit.
For notes. Yes. I have my 3 Kaweco Sports, actually 4, sitting here in front of me. I've been on a Kaweco kick lately, so That tracks very well.
But it
So in
was
terms
actually I will just say it was actually sketching that got me back into fountain pens because around 2009, I began to have a daily habit of keeping a sketch journal, and someone was, an Australian artist, Liz Steele, was teaching classes online, that related to that, and she was really encouraging people to use a Metropolitan Pilot. So that was the sort of re-entry pen for me, was a bunch of those, but I don't tend to use those as much, but I really enjoyed them, initially.
so it sounds like between Twisbys and Lamies, you prefer the more German nib versus the Japanese. Is that accurate?
I do like pilots, so I'm quite happy to try them all. I'm really blessed to have a local stationery store in Boston. In West Newton, which is a Boston suburb, there's a lovely store, the Paper Mouse, and that's one of my go-to spots. And every year on their birthday in November, they have a fountain pen event where you can try any pen and any ink and any book, and you bring in your own book. So it is a blast. And um, that was where I tried a Pilot Falcon and just fell in love with the feel of that. And it took me a while to save up for one, but that was sort of on my radar. And of course, I bought it from them because why would I get it discounted somewhere online? And I also, got a higher end sort of gold nib Sailor. But I'm not trying to accumulate like every latest color of Sailor. I was just thrilled to have one. So
If you tried to accumulate every Sailor and every Twisby, you would be constantly ordering pins every day. It seems like Twisby lately has been releasing a new one every 2 weeks, and Sailor kind of has their spurts as well. But I'm kind of in that same realm where I like to get new pins, but I also they're all very similar in how they write, or the preferences really come through in terms of what pins I'm adding, like getting all the metal ones and kind of going through that phase. So it's interesting how we all approach which pins or inks we have in the collection, because one of my current inks is also like you were describing. It's a Vanessa ink called Fresh as a Daisy, which is supposed to be pollen green. So it sounds like it's a similar vein to the diamine that you got,
yeah,
just because it is a very spring color. Um, but I also fully agree. You're lucky to have a local store like I am, and supporting the local stores is important. So that way they'll still be around for people to be able to shop at many years to come, hopefully.
yeah.
So, what about when you're writing? You said you do journaling in a Hobonichi. What are some of your other papers that you like to write on?
Traveler's notebooks. And I also actually really like Target has very inexpensive notebooks in their up and up, cheapo line. And they're surprisingly good with fountain pens. And I love to use those for abundant, just getting thoughts out. I do a lot of brainstorming using a typewriter, but I write morning pages every day, and I tend to use a less expensive book that I don't mind how quickly I get through it. They also do a really tiny, they do a tiny notebook, and I always use a sticker on the front from the artist Anna Brones. This one says "Permission to Procrastinate," nice, shiny. Um, but it has a pocket in the front. Everything goes in here that um, when I need to contact someone, my weekly planning, my brainstorming. I play a game called the dice game, which is an ADHD technique where you just say you have 7 things to do and you're sort of stuck. You write them down, you give them each an array of numbers, use a 20-sided dice, roll, and whatever you roll, you got to do. But number 20 is a fun thing. So that's one of my I am, you know, dragging the afternoon, or I've got a ton of emails that all equal things. So I will write those lists in there. So that's sort of one of my, it's like a little junk journal. I don't care if I lose it. Well, I do because I got important stuff in there. But, I get through it. It's not a big loss. When I'm at the end, I just start another one, and they're a few bucks. So I'm actually very happy to use those. And I love index cards. Those are one of my very favorite things.
I'm a big index card user myself. I like the Natsu and the Exacompta because they're great with fountain pens, ballpoints, roller balls, pretty much anything you want to throw at it, they're going to work well. But it's interesting you were talking about the dice game. Well Appointed Desk. Anna, who runs that site, teaches a class at a lot of pen shows called Gamify Your Life, which is her version of that, essentially making it into a role playing game. And when you have your task, you roll a dice and prioritize, and when you get a 20, you do the thing. So it's neat to see that you know, she's been able to customize her version of that and hearing about other versions. Because if you think about any game we're going to play, it's got regionalization applied to it. So that's neat to hear, that's not just one area, but that's there's other aspects of similar theme of ways to make getting stuff done that you might not want to a little bit more interesting.
Yep. Yeah,
And
I
let's see, one of the specific questions for you, because you're in the typewriter space, is what have you been typing on lately?
well, my go-to is typically an Olympia. So Olympia SM3 was my very first typewriter, or a Splendid 99. It's a very small typewriter I absolutely love. I have a robin's egg blue one that's one of my close companions. Honestly, since I just got back from Richard Polt's typewriter swap, I've been mostly typing on the machines I brought home. So I got an Aztec 600. That is just a dream. It's an absolute dream typewriter. And also a surprise, I got a Remington 3 that has an italic typeface that someone had brought in the last hour of the swap meet. That I've been looking for an italic typewriter for maybe 6 years. So I was very excited to get that. And it's
No.
so snappy. I love, love, love Remington 2s and 3s, early Remingtons.
When it had that beautiful red color, I remember seeing that when I forget her name, I think maybe Yvette or something
Yvette,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah. She showed up later in the day and brought new typewriters that a lot of us are like, "Hey, what's that over there? What's that table? You gotta go over and take a look." But I've been doing the same. You can see on over this shoulder is my one of the Lateras I brought home. Over this shoulder is the Olympia SM4 with the script. Behind that's a Hermes Baby. So those are the 3 I've been using this week so far, and then I've got the whole shelf over here with the other, 12 that also need some time, but it's I've approached typewriters kind of like pens. Use them all for different purposes. Some have different ribbons and whatnot, and it's neat to be able to take the hobby and expound on it, however you want to do it when it comes
Yeah.
to those. But and then my favorite question that I love asking everybody is what is your favorite stationery adjacent item? And by that, I mean a messenger bag, a lap desk, a book weight, a cover, something like that that's not pen, paper, ink, or in your case, typewriter that you find yourself using all the time.
I love containers. So I have a basket I keep down here that's a fun color, and I consider that my playground. So I'm a big fan of The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron, and the idea of play and things being a bit lighter than they have. There's a lot of heaviness in the world right now, and that's real, but we're allowed to also have a sort of playfulness and maybe not take things so seriously. So I will kind of gather things, and they aren't used all the time, but if I need a little break, that's my kind of oh, what's in here? I forage around and find things. I just picked some things up on Facebook Marketplace this week that um, went straight in there, and I'll use them when I'm in a long phone call. I might just take something out and doodle, and I'll even have kids Crayola crayons in there. So you
Oh,
never
you got
know.
to have good variety, something to like for me, I'm always either holding one of the pins on my desk or I have like the little Zento signature that's got the magnetic cap. So I will be sitting there
Yep.
on a meeting just doing that. It's keeping your hands busy while you're needing to pay attention, which I think there's a lot of us in the pin world who kind of have that. That's why fidget toys and things
Yeah.
like that are just kind of fun things to have on your desk for that just in case or, needing something to kind of help the focus, especially later on in the day. In my case, the later the day goes, it's like, okay, let's get things finished. Let's finish this day out, and then we can get to the fun stuff after.
Yeah, and it's also the element of deciding ahead of time that I can't do everything, but I can choose something. And if a container reduces the decision making. I just find that very helpful to have, and to even make that a fun step of sort of almost like shopping from my own supplies. And what goes in here, I used to do that with my kids when they were really little, of, go around the house and find, 3 books about whatever, and, in your little basket. So, I guess I'm still, basically a big kid.
No, that it's always nice that for some things like that, that's a common theme, especially I've seen this year. Using what you have versus adding in a lot of new.
Yeah.
It's good to do that every so often to kind of return to the basics. You already bought this in the past for some reason, and it's been sitting on the shelf, and you forgot you had it. Maybe that's the thing you need to be using now instead of seeking out the next big thing or something like that. But
Yeah.
let's move on to, your background in the writing and the paper blogging website. So, just in general, how long ago or what are the origins of your website and how did you get started into deciding I'm going to put my work out here on the internet for people to be able to consume?
I built websites long before I had that particular one. I got into HTML and trying to, get my writing out there. I was published in magazines and, used that to pay a web designer. And I also learned HTML myself. But when blogging platforms came along, that just really made things so much more streamlined. And I think around 2014, I went to a class in London with this wonderful writer called the Gentle Author, who writes spitalfieldslife.com, which is, he writes anonymously about this small region of London, the East End of London, and all the different people and characters and architecture and you name it. And his goal was to write something every day for 10,000 days, which is a huge commitment, actually. Um, and he would have this weekend writing course about sort of learning from him and launching a blog. So that was a really wonderful gift to be able to go over there and stay and meet him and take part in that. And I've actually been back for a reunion with a bunch of people, and it got canceled. I was actually supposed to fly the day of lockdown to go do that, and that got delayed by about a year and a half, but we all got together eventually. I have one person in particular I met that weekend who still reads my website and emails me about what I'm writing, and I don't always write prolifically because, life happens, but I haven't stopped since then. So that's almost 12 years.
And that's the fun thing with websites is going back and reading some of your initial stuff. I know because I started my website the first time January 1st of 2000, and I was like, I'm going to make a website, and then over time some of those older things got lost. But then just going back and reading some of the stuff, I'm like, wow, that brings back memories. Like you meet people, and you might be following them forever on their online space and all these things because you've been reading what they've written for so long. So it's always
Yeah.
neat and to hear how that evolves for different people. But you have a page on your site that I found very interesting talking about some of the origins of in the past or close to losing your eyesight, where that how that changed your perspective and led you down a different path. Kind of talk through that because that was a really interesting story and reading that and prepping for the interview.
Yeah, well done for finding that. That's somewhat hidden. It's like a little, little crumb of for people to find at the end there. Um, yeah, when I originally started my website, my sort of through line was being grateful for my site and having this sort of daily or frequent sketching habit. So I was really intending to write about that. I didn't know I was going to end up writing about typewriters, but we can talk about that in a little bit. Um, but I wanted to just put that story out. So, well, yeah, when I was about 13, my eyes began to get cloudy and I was having a problem with my sight. And a doctor in England told me that I was losing my sight and that I had about 3 months left to be able to see. And one thing that really impacted me, a strong memory I have, is waiting by Norwich Cathedral. I lived in the city of Norwich in this 900-year-old cathedral that I was sitting with my back to, waiting for my mom so that we could go see a specialist whose office was just right around the corner, and just watching these English sparrows splashing in a puddle and being brought up short by the thought that I might not see that again. And it was springtime, and it was, just it couldn't have been more ordinary. English ordinary sparrows just ignoring me and splashing. And that really struck me. Um, the actual medical details of how it was that I didn't lose my sight, I actually don't really know because I was a kid. But the end result was that I did not. I ended up, it began to reverse. I got my sight back. It led to my mom actually converting to become a Christian because she had been praying for me. And it was very important. I was an only child, and this was really impactful to her also. And Honestly, every spring I see sparrows splashing in a puddle, and it brings me up short to remember, actually, I can see. And it's pretty common for people to have blank page, angst or all of that. And I'm like, just do it. Just draw, just enjoy, because you actually can. And so I'm really, really grateful that I can see. And it's been kind of a thread through my life of being able to, take time to create. And life gets busy, and I really do try and prioritize that and don't take it for granted.
And that's nice to have a story like that that you can use to refocus when you are busy and you're like, you know what? I haven't taken enough time to write or get my thoughts down. It's a way to kind of quickly get back in the right headspace to continue down the writing or typing or art journey, depending on whatever seems to suit the fancy of that day and time.
Yeah.
So a lot of your writing is about just analog in general and the different ways and categories of analog, be it art, writing, fountain pens, typewriters. And I do like that on your website you categorize things kind of by like that. You have these are about in this bucket, these are in this bucket. So kind of talk about how that came to be and you kind of your categories. You might say that when you're writing or creating art or different things that you decide which one of those categories is gonna be the main theme.
It's definitely evolved. So it evolved from here I am telling stories. I wanted to write something that was a bit more long form, away from the Twitter blurb into this is a thoughtful essay with a beginning, middle, and an end. And this is my website, and I can do what I want with it. So, um, and it as I got interested in typewriters, um, I know I wrote about Type Out that Cambridge Typewriter had, and the owner of Cambridge Typewriter, the wonderful Tom Furrier, who became a good friend, he linked to my write up of his type in, and then from that, Richard Polk put my website in the news in the feed in the footer of his two websites, and I was just like, oh, now I'm going to be read by all these typewriter people, and I don't always write about typewriters. I had a little existential crisis over that. I was like, oh, just get on with it. just write. And as my interest in typewriters, which I got my first machine 2017, I have just really leaned into that. And it was surprising now if I write about a particular make of typewriter, within the week, that's on page one of Google for that, when people Google that, that machine. And it's like, it's surprising how that's come about. But then I did take some time a few years ago. I actually went through and I made an index card for every post that I had made and like what category I'd put. I was just trying to, what am I doing? What have I done here? And I took some time that summer to just do, 5 or 6 a day, where I would just summarize what I'd written about, and what categories I'd given it. And I was trying to think of the overarching theme. I realized that, first of all, wonder and resilience. And so I wrote myself kind of a mission statement related to that. And I also realized the overarching theme is analog tools explored online, or analog joys explored online, because there's a bit of tension with the fact that I'm online writing about analog tools. And I constantly go back to, I need to be doing this, not saying I'm doing this. And so sometimes I'm not putting much out because I'm busy doing, and then it overflows into writing about it. But sometimes I have to dial that back and, remind myself. I have taught, so we homeschooled all our kids, K through 12, and I'm just finishing the very last one. So I've taught high school classes for teens at our homeschool co-op, and I've brought typewriters into that, and I've also done a lot of nature journaling. So I was teaching nature journaling, and I realized that it was very hard for me to nature journal myself, which I needed to be doing to show the kids and also teaching. And then if I also wanted to write about teaching. So I was hoping to have a whole series of blog posts all through the year about, our class. And I realized those were 3 points of the triangle, and I could only have 2 points. Um, it was going to have to be, if I was writing about it, the teaching, then I wasn't probably going to be doing it, that the doing had to come first. So I really actually learned a lot from that, no, my practice that overflows into teaching, and only then am I going to write, from the overflow of that. So it's kind of humbling. It's like, okay, I can't do everything.
And the irony is there when people, we're talking about analog fountain pens, typewriters, whatever, but you're doing it online, and that's where I found when I got into typewriters, besides like Richard, where he's typing it out with a typewriter and then just taking a picture and putting it online. So it's that whole typosphere Zane esque, movement. Oh, okay. So that means they had to sit down and do this in an analog way, but they want you to be able to read it. So let me take a picture of it and put it online. So it's a neat um, way to share analog with other analog minded people, because we're not going to be able to go fully digital less. We can use it less, but we're not going to be able to avoid it in
Yeah.
most of life. So it's an interesting way to kind of serve both purposes of doing, like you're talking about, the analog, but also encouraging others to do the analog by them seeing you as an example. So it's interesting how those kind of paths and interact with each other. But what are some of the tools that you found along this analog path to do less screens and, more writing or typing or artistic pursuits? Are there any tools, like you mentioned the dice game earlier, ways to kind of force the issue to make sure you're spending the time to do, not just consume?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've definitely got a lot out of going through the artist's way 4 times since the pandemic, always with a group. I don't get through it if it's not. That playful, the questions that she asks each week, it's a 12-week sort of supposedly recovery program for artists or creatives. So I definitely get reignited by doing that. And also, I appreciate the thoughtful questions that Cal Newport's been asking. Recently, he had a blog, a podcast about, how do we reverse the brain rot, from that we all know we can experience when we're scrolling on our phones too much. And I'm right up there. I love breaking news, and I can play online games quite frequently on my phone, and love audiobooks and get lost in those. Plugging in my phone and putting it somewhere where I am not is pretty helpful. And reading and writing on a typewriter, uh, those are helpful. And also being embodied, getting outside and walking. I try to walk 2 to 4 miles every day in Harvard's Arboretum, and I will take my phone with me because I'll take some photographs. But I'm not looking up things. It's firmly in a little pouch. So, um, sort of, I was at Lilac Sunday last Sunday for Mother's Day, and about 30,000 people show up. They descend on the arboretum, and are all smelling the lilacs. And it really struck me, nobody was scrolling on their phone, because people were taking pictures, but that was it. No one was distracted. You could not ignore 300 lilacs of their fragrance and variety. And it was sunny. People were enjoying, each other's company. There were every variety of dog you've ever seen is somehow, parading past. And it was so refreshing to just be in a big group of people where everyone was actually experiencing that in the moment. So I love living in a city. I love public transportation. I love libraries and, stopping at the stationery store to actually chat and connect. Or when we had a typewriter store, the same, people, connection, they all help. They're all embodied and, um, you know, involve being offline. So it's a struggle. It's a constant pull. Those apps are designed really well to be addictive.
They are, but it's also one thing I've appreciated, like, I'm an iPhone or a Mac person, but they've created the focus modes, which I'm a big fan of those because if I'm doing something like writing, I put on the writing focus mode and it doesn't let anything through unless it's my wife calling or, like, family member or some sort of it's gotta be important. Other than that, I don't wanna see notifications about this or that or read email. I'll do that after the fact. So at least some of the digital, they're starting to add in tools to help get your focus on where it needs to be it enjoying a day at the park or going off or writing or being able to work uninterrupted and turn off the constant notifications of your game or your Twitter or your TikTok or whatever it may be, so that way you can have some time to do other things and not get that constant distraction that I think plagues all of us to some extent all the time because we're
Yeah.
bombarded by it nonstop.
Tool that I have really helped that's helped me online has been Momentum Dashboard, which is a Chrome extension. Um, that I really find that a calm environment. It's similar, it has a focus mode and they have a notes um, section, and it was a really beautiful photograph, and the color of everything relates to that day's picture. And when you write in notes, you're writing in white on the color background, and it's just really works for me. It's almost like using a typewriter. Like there are no auto corrections. It's very basic, and that's actually helpful because it's minimal. So I enjoy that.
It sounds interesting. I'll definitely have to check that out. And for everything we're talking about, be sure and if you're not familiar, look at the notes afterwards because we'll have links to most all these things as well if you're new to the podcast. But in terms of if you wanted to, if someone comes up to Michelle and says, I've been reading your website and I want to try and do and become a more analog person, what are some ways you would suggest that they might follow to get started down that path that, that you've developed over your time of writing and thinking about it and putting thought into, classes you've taught or things like that. So what would your advice be to someone who wants to stop and do less digital and more analog?
I think I'd ask them some leading questions about, what are they hoping to do? Because it's one thing to not do something, but it's better if it's positive. What would they like to do? Because we can all like focus on what we don't like about the digital world. Um, so I think I'd probably ask them some questions about, what's something that you enjoy that you did as a child when's the last time you did that thing? Like when I was a kid, I loved map making. I used to like making treasure maps and, I'm really considering like how can I fold that in now? What's some element of that I could get back, I could experience now? So I would sort of ask them what intrigues them, what catches their attention, why would someone want to use a typewriter or a fountain pen? What about that are you excited about, and what would you use that for? I really like the tool of writing your future self a letter. I will even do it for the end of the day if I really need help. So, I might just sort of get a typewriter and write, "I'm so glad that you chose this, not that today, because evening me is pretty thankful." But actually, it's sort of a funny thing, but it actually has been quite shocking how helpful it is when it's a bit more long term, where I will just type this letter from imaginary me, but actually find out what I think. Um, and we've had some spectacular, I didn't know that to celebrate my 50th birthday, what I most wanted was to rent little house on the Cape Cod, and all my kids come and stay, after their college exams and before, their jobs started because everyone was scattering and busy, and then a friend told us about a half-price rental that friends of theirs had. We ended up actually doing this, and I wrote about it months before. So I would do a variation on if I could do one thing, it would be, I want to write a letter to someone every week, and I want to use fun colors, or, just kind of explore what might a little bit of change look like, or what kind of fun project do you want to get into? And you can't get there all at once necessarily, but you can find a piece of it that you can.
No, and that's so true because, a lot of people will say, okay, I'm intrigued by fountain pens or I'm intrigued by typewriters. And a lot of times they've never used either. So you might, like, I took one of the typewriters out. My wife and I went to a new bookstore that has like a little bar and cafe in it. And I took the typewriter because she had been there already once and they had some as decoration. And she was talking about, they noticed her taking pictures of them. And so she was talking to the bartender, like, "Oh," they're like, "Are you a typewriter fan?" He's like, "No, that's my husband. I'll bring him back at some point." So I went there and putting a piece of paper in and turning it around for the bartender to type themselves a sentence. All of a sudden, they're like, "Okay, I'm gonna have to get one of these." Then they saw me using a fountain pen because I was doing some letter writing and things like
Yeah.
that. They're like, "Wait, fountain pen? Oh yeah, there's a pen store down the road. You didn't know?" But so it's that kind of intrigue, the curiosity around the analog thing. So a lot of it times it's not so much having to guide someone to it. It's telling them how to, like you said, the slow entry in, because there's a lot of you can get overboard really quickly in a lot of these hobby slash analog pursuits. And sometimes it's good to have someone kind of help guide of, okay, let's start slow. Let's get a pen. Here's some good paper. Find an ink that's a color you like. Here's some suggestions, and let's start from there and then work your way up to see if it takes, see if it catches, and if so, then here's a list of websites. Go read the paper blogging site, or go read the Pen Addict, or go read the Typewriter Revolution website. You can point to all these other resources, so then the person can take it to whatever level of how deep they want to go. They
Yes.
can stay on the surface level or they can go full tilt. Let's learn how to repair this typewriter I just bought off marketplace versus let me go to a shop and get one that's already fully ready to go that I don't have to do anything with except put in paper and start typing.
Yes, and I love having events. So I actually have a grant from the city of Boston to hold letter writing events on typewriters in Boston, which is a crazy thing that they gave me this grant. But I've really enjoyed introducing people to typewriters. I've also done paid events with the Paper Mouse. They have a lovely event space and they provide stationery, and people get a fountain pen and Crown Mill envelopes and, paper and stickers. Everyone gets a little envelope, and I set out the typewriters in order of age. So there's a lot of, can you figure out why they're in this order? And I know numerous people have ended up buying a typewriter. They've got back to me later. I definitely was an enabler. So, but I gave a talk. My team gave a talk about the importance of teenagers writing letters. I gave a talk about typewriters, and it was just really enjoyable. We even had Boston University students who were making a documentary about typewriters, so they were filming it. It was just, it was great.
No, that sounds interesting because that's something I've personally been trying to do this year is more letter writing because one, it forces me to use all these papers and
Yeah.
pens and typewriters that I've been accumulating and it forces the issue. Like when I went to Cincinnati for the meetup, because as a naturally introverted person, meetups, and I was talking about this with someone on one of their streams today who's an ink watcher. That's kind of her hobby specialization in the stationery world. And it was in the chat talking about all kind of have our things that even if we're naturally introverted, it kind of flips the switch and it
Yep.
opens up, re-energizes you. And the meetups, getting to talk to like-minded people, like going to the typewriter thing. I had no idea what to expect going to an event in Cincinnati to pick up some typewriters and then, you know, turns out, wait, these other people, I have things in common with them. Let's talk about this, talking about this or that. And that actually makes me think of another question that relates to one of your most recent posts, the permission slips. So
Yeah.
that's something that we had talked about, the Pen Addict, Brad linked that on there. So talk about the permission slips. And what that is, because I thought that was a unique idea because as people were coming up curious about typewriters, they saw this event
Yeah.
and you were able to sit down and help them kind of draft their own permission slip for things they wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, that was just sort of spur of the moment. So I'd already written the post and I thought, I should take these with me and do them. And I ended up writing myself a permission slip the day after the event about the events of that day and what I needed a bit of energy to do. So I mentioned before, Anna Brones is a paper cut artist in Washington State. And she sells this pad of very simple, just her artwork, and it just says permission slip, permission to. And this idea I originally got from The Artist's Way and numerous other books that you know, come with a permission slip. So in The Artist's Way, you just sign your name and date that you are going to commit to doing this 12-week book. But I find it more powerful if I actually worded that myself. So this is fun to letter with. I love Pentel brush pens, sign pens, or with a typewriter. You can write, write a bit on there. But it was really interesting asking people. Some people laughed and said, oh, they were not at all interested, but there were a couple of people very intrigued. One guy in particular probably spent about 20 minutes telling me where his hangups were about this project he wanted to do. And he just circled around over and over again. And I gave him a lot of advice and I listened and I empathized and he got pretty moved, at the whole process and people giving me hugs and thanking me. And one woman was going to go laminate hers at the library. So it's powerful. It's simple, but also it's powerful. So the idea is, you know, I asked them, what do you feel like you need permission for? And they use variations on rest or creating
Oh,
something
it's
or
interesting from my standpoint
starting
to
that thing
be,
that
kind of
someone was
set up
tripping themselves
beside
up
the
over,
table where you
but
and your
in
husband
their
have the
words,
typewriters you were looking
and then they
to,
sign it
find a
because
new
they're giving
home.
themselves permission.
And
I'm
just
not,
watching the
it's not
interaction of
not my
people
job to
coming
give
up
them
and,
permission. I'm just helping them
talking to
think
you,
about it.
and it was a neat thing to be a bystander of, hearing people kind of tell oh, and then it kind of opened their eyes, like, sometimes people just needed someone to listen. And it wasn't so much that you were asking, like you said, they just needed to talk about it, and you happened to be the impetus for them to realize they needed to talk about it and talk it out, to get those thoughts out and then have them recorded in a unique way so that then they could take that and run with it after the fact. So that was just interesting. And that post, I went back and read it after the fact because I wasn't familiar, because I've never gone through the artist way. I have some friends who have, but I think after reading all this now, I'm going to have to look into it. But it's just interesting to see how these common themes tie together in this whole analog bubble of hobby slash, because stationery, it's a hobby for some, it's a lifestyle for some, it's a tool set for some. It's kind of this weird conglomeration to different people and how they consume the analog and the stationary. And it's neat to see when the streams can kind of cross, and it helps be an introduction to people who might not even think to look down that path otherwise. And you've contributed to, like you mentioned earlier, some different publications and stuff like that. So just give a brief summary, and we'll put a link to the, on your website. You have some of these documented, but where are some other places that you've been published, or that, your work aside from your own website, people can read more of things you've created or written?
Yes, I've been in several anthologies that are fairly low key, small little publications, and on my about page there's a link to each of those. But I am actually working on something rather exciting. First of all, there's going to be an article in the Christian Science Monitor coming out the May 18th print issue, and then it will be online, that I didn't write, but it's I was part of the process of the interviews for that. That came about from a letter writing event I did, and I didn't know that one of their journalists was at the event and then contacted me. But we've actually been working on that since October, and they've come over and interviewed me several times. We've done photo shoots. I've given them 2 typewriters to use. This has been quite a long process. So I'm excited about that article coming out. From my writing, I wrote. I'm really trying to get into some nature writing and I had a desire to be published in a Harvard journal called Arnoldia, which is the Journal of Trees. And I'm quite excited to have the opportunity to do that. That's upcoming. So that will be I took my sketchbooks into the editor of Arnoldia, and we talked for over an hour. And I thought he was going to ask me to do a very small thing. And he said, actually, I think I'd like you to do a 6,500 word feature article with 12 of your sketches, as long as they have your handwriting. And it can be on any topic, anything you like, and you can take as long as you like. It's one of the most invitational things that's ever come about, but it was directly from something I wrote on my website that I sent to a horticulturalist to thank them for some work that they do that impacts me. And he said, you should be contributing to Arnoldia. So I'm like, okay, I will be happy to do that. So that will be in the winter edition of that journal, and that will be online also. And I will say I have a lovely little pouch from Galen Leather. I'm very fond of Galen Leather products. I don't know if you've come across those. And I use some, the Traveler's Notebooks. I just kind of put their regular elastic and tied them in. But I have a notebook in here that I really, really recommend this. It's called my What If notebook. And it just says, what if, ? And I just do one thing per page. And the interesting thing is the very first page, a year ago, I said, what if I got something published in Arnoldia and it's dated? And I just left it. And I came back to it in July and it says, yes, I would like to do this. And underneath that, I've sort of unraveled the story of how that came about. And I'm really shocked that this is actually going to happen. But there are a lot of pages in here. I don't use this frequently, but I put some pretty heartfelt things in here, and I don't resolve them. I just say, what if what if I held a type in? What if the thing that I maybe I don't want to go into all the details, but I'm just playing with the idea. And I'm shocked at how powerful it is to come back and see in black and white, in paper or in print, I said that like, but there's a date, and I did say that. And sometimes they're just fairly humble things, but a few of them are very heartfelt, and it's kind of an interesting long-term notebook idea. It's not a daily thing, but I'm constantly surprised when I flip through that of how things begin to come into being from doing that.
Oh, that's interesting because I do a small subset version of that, like with starting a podcast. I'd never done any of this, and I was like, okay, let me just start writing down a list of people at some point I want to interview, and people who I'd never met, but they might be like pen addict, or people of that who are well known in that community, and me just being kind of, hey, I'm a new guy, I just want to let's do this. And it was interesting to see how eventually there's check marks next to most of those names now. And it's like, oh, wait, I did that. So I'm not doing a what if notebook, but it's kind of the what if index card of the names on there of, I was trying to plan out future things. And then I do the same thing. I would like your idea. I might have to look into adding a different notebook, but in journaling of when I sit down, be it at a typewriter or with a pen, my brain thinks differently. And I was like, wait, what if I did that? What if I did try and do a type in? Or what if I did a podcast? What if I did all these things? And I don't have them in a separate notebook, but I like that idea. So that's something I might have to take away and give that a try. Even if I'm putting it in the journal, that makes the idea show up, add it to something else to kind of leave as that open-ended, let's see if it actually comes to fruition, or if not, maybe it's going to spring another idea or something for the future as well.
I'll tell you, one of my not yet done what ifs is I keep thinking about the idea of having a YouTube channel where the audio is no talking, just typing and comparing different type sounds. Oh, here are all my royals, and someone who cared about this royal versus that royal would be able to hear the progression of sounds, but someone who just wanted that background as an audio. I know in the Boston Globe newspaper, when they stopped using typewriters, some of the older journalists just couldn't work. They had to pipe in typewriter sounds so that they could concentrate. Um, and I know some people would really like to have just that as a background. So I haven't done it yet, though.
Oh, but that is an interesting idea because it serves two purposes for someone who's wants to hear, because that's a, a unique thing with typewriters for those who might not be familiar. The sound really can be affect how you feel using a typewriter, at least for me.
Very
Some of
different.
them are they're meant to be quiet. They're meant to be, taking out somewhere and not being the center of attention. And then there's others that, you can take that out and everybody around you is going to know you're using the typewriter and they're going to start looking because it's going to be loud and it's going to sing the song of its people, you might say. And it's, finding that mixture. Because I know for me, if I'm going somewhere that I want to have the typewriter with me and be using it, but I don't want to create a disruption, I'm going to choose certain typewriters that are meant to be on the quieter side versus the Royal desktop that, you type on that and someone down the block is going to know, okay, Derek has that typewriter out again type scenario.
Yes. And
But
the letter 22 that you have, the Olivetti, that is my go-to library typewriter. That's very quiet.
yeah, that's the one I took with me, one of the Lateras to the bookstore bar. The other one that I've been carrying around lately, if I'm going somewhere, is the Hermes Rocket because it's
Yeah.
also very quiet, or the Skywriter. So I've got a couple that are in that easily portable, but also, because that's one thing I've learned. Set up a typewriter somewhere, people will come ask questions.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready for that. And I always keep extra paper sitting there. So if it's someone who wants to, they've never used one or they're curious, put a piece of paper in there and let them type. And that might be that the tipping point for them to, you know what, I'm going to go find a typewriter. Or I'm going to go look into that. So it's a unique way to spread the joy without
Hmm.
even really having to do anything. You're just doing what you're doing. People will come to you. If you build it, they will come and they will come ask questions with their curiosity, and you can help guide them down that path. But as we're
Definitely.
wrapping up here, this is the final question, and you've already touched on some of it, but this is a final thought. What is next for Michelle and paperblogging.com overall?
Yes, when you sent me that question, I was like, wow, this is a tough one. This is a really interesting season for our family. As I said, we're about to send our last child off to college, and it sort of opens up some possibilities. I love going to London, and when I'm in London, I think, oh, if I lived in London, I would write at the British Library and I would get a membership to the London Library and I would do all these things. And I was very challenged last time I was there to say, wait a minute, but what about where you do live? What are you doing with what you can actually do? So I have been, I love writing at libraries, and so I'm going to have more writing time, and I'm really interested in exploring. I don't quite know what I will be using it for. I have been researching a book topic for a long time, and I would love to, um, take some steps towards moving that project along. And first up will be finishing this enormous feature article for Arnoldia. I don't know what will come from that, and so that will be step one. But after that, it's all right. I have all these tools. What am I going to do with them? So
Oh, that's
we will
very neat.
we will see.
Well, no, now you can just put those in your what if pages and then you'll have something to go back and look at, what did come to be or what came to fruition and what didn't, or how you could, when you've got some of that spare time in the future, you know what, in this what if page, it says this, and kind of forgot about this one. Let's see what we can do to make that one happen.
Yes.
Michelle, I just wanted to say thank you for taking some time, to do this. It was great meeting you and talking a little bit of typewriter, a little bit of pen stuff in Cincinnati. And it's just kind of odd that someone from Boston and someone from Nashville meet up in Cincinnati to buy some typewriters. Then you end up realizing, hey, very common themes and shared interest and things like that. So I really appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully this will be the spark that some people need of just hearing the conversation, and maybe they're going to start a what if book, or look at the artist way, or look forward to reading some more of your post, or maybe your feature article when it gets released in the Analdia or something like that. I just wanted to say appreciate you taking your time, and any final words before we kind of end the episode?
Well, I have to say that I am really enjoying this very blingy purple pen that that you made. That was a real. I did not go to that event expecting to come home with a beautiful handmade pen, so that was a lovely, lovely part of the event. So thank you.
And that just for I Michelle and I, as we got to the end of the day, I had a couple of pins I had made with me, and Michelle had a typewriter that I was like, I already got one of those, but a second one is never a bad thing because typewriters have different typefaces. So we actually traded a pen for a typewriter. We both went home happy, and
Yeah.
I'm glad to know that you're enjoying it and using it, because I'm at the point with the same way with the typewriter of using it and enjoying it as well. So until next time, I want to thank you for listening and following along. Definitely check out the notes, because Michelle's going to we'll put links to a lot of these. And I think we were talking about writing up a blog post that has some art and some other things that she'll be able to show there that don't come through on the camera during the interview as well. So look forward to that. So if you don't see that link, you can find it on paperblogging.com once that's up, and I'll add it to the notes even after the fact. So check back if you don't see that there when this was initially published. But until next time, I appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode.